All right, welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Komoroski from Millvale Borough PD in Pennsylvania, 33 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Komoroski. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Of course, I'm really looking forward to it. Tell us a little bit about you. What have the last 33 years looked like for you?
Uh, in the Allegheny County area in Pennsylvania, when I started policing, you had to work part-time to get a full-time job. And part-time, it does not mean a few hours a week. It means up to 70, 80 hours a week for
Wow.
two or three different departments. So I started with a couple part-time departments for about 2 years, 2.5 years. Went to the Port Authority of Allegheny County, which is the Transit Police Department in Pittsburgh, for about 20 years. And I took an early retirement because Millvale's my hometown, born and raised here. Didn't like the way the police department was going for a long time. So when they were hiring, took a shot and interviewed for the position. I'm going on my 11th year here now as the chief.
I love it. When you say you didn't like how things were going, I find that to be really interesting because I have a lot of conversations with leadership that says similar things of, I really learned from things that maybe weren't going very well, or I learned from maybe leadership who weren't doing things that I necessarily agreed with, and I wanted to make it a better place. What were some of the things that maybe you wanted to come in and improve?
Well, first off, I agree with you totally because I've learned a lot from all my former chiefs. I've learned from everyone. I've learned some things to do right, and I've learned a lot of things that were wrong
Mm-hmm.
and how to correct them. But Millvale, I'd always lived fairly close to it, even after I had moved out of the town from when I was younger. And it was always kind of embarrassing. It was always getting sued. It was always a training ground, never a place where officers went to spend their career. Didn't believe it had to be that way. I was in charge of training at the Port Authority for about the last 11 years I was there. And I think most things come down to training and leadership. And I think Billville was lacking on both of that.
Yeah.
So.
What are some of the training methods or processes that you had put in place that have maybe changed that to where people do want to come and spend their career there?
Well, first off, you go into field training. Every officer, no matter how much experience they have, gets 12 weeks of training with another officer, with a trained and certified field training officer. When I was with the Port Authority, we had a very outdated field training officer manual. I asked my chief at the time for permission to rewrite it, and I wrote a new manual.
Mm.
And I brought that manual with me to Millville. So every officer goes through the same training. Every officer, I don't care if they've been a policeman for 20 years, if they start here, they start from scratch again.
Yeah.
Um, and they've got to understand the mindset. The mindset comes from me, um, but it's important that the officers understand what will be tolerated and what won't be tolerated.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's really an interesting conversation because we talk about culture a lot and the importance of culture. And if previously you had a culture that maybe wasn't very healthy, where people were like not wanting to stay, they're wanting to lateral or maybe start there and jump to another place because they didn't feel like there was that healthy foundation there. That is retention too, right? It's hiring, it's retention, it's wellness, it's all of it. And so coming into the new organization saying, hey, I'm going to try to shift the culture and the mindset so that we can retain our people and we can have better processes and training that also is going to impact wellness.
Exactly. If an officer is coming here thinking I'm just going to get a couple of years of training and then I'm going to look for my forever job,
Yeah.
well, that's not really healthy. That's not conducive to, I'm going to start a career. I'm going to, I'm getting married or I am married. I'm going to start a family. I want to purchase a home. All those things go along with a good full-time position where you can count on an income, it's going to be there. But I can be honest with you, most of the officers that were here when I got here are no longer here.
Yeah.
Um, there's a couple that had just started here, so they were brand new, and we were able to retain them. But a lot of people didn't necessarily agree with my outlook on what a department should look like. And, a department is a reflection of the town. And first and foremost, I think the department should match the demographics of the town if possible.
Mm.
Everybody wants to feel the representative. So I'm not saying go out and hire people just because they fit in a category, but you can, if you put the work in, you can hire people that fit in certain categories that are really qualified.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
Yeah.
So
I think that everyone can relate to this in a certain way that if you are really invested in your career within, maybe that's in law enforcement or maybe it's a different career, but if you are invested and you're saying, this is where I want to be, this is the community, this is the team that I want to be a part of, the way you show up for work and the way you present yourself and the work ethic that you have is going to be so different than if you're like, this is just a means to an end. I'm looking for the next thing. And we've all, I think, been there. I mean, I've been there, where like I've had, certain jobs or opportunities where I'm like, yeah, this isn't forever. It's just for now. And the way I show up is so different than somewhere where I'm like, this is it. And I really care and want to be here. And so I like that you mentioned that of trying to find people and put in place processes and, create a culture where people want to be there and they want to be there long term, because I do think that that impacts the way you show up.
I do, and I think if it's little things. It's, sit down with the officers after you hire them, find out what do they want to do in their career. We're a small department, so I'm not going to have a homicide division. I'm not going to have a narcotics division, but I do have school resource officer. I just do have a detective. I do have juvenile officers. I do have traffic officers. So what do you want to do? What is it that you would like to specialize in that we can send you to training for?
Mhm.
And it makes you want to come to work just a little bit more. I have officers that are on our SRT team, which is our SWAT team here in the northern part of the county, and having those SWAT wings on their uniform and getting call outs and going to that training means the world to them.
Yeah.
So if that makes coming to work just a little bit better, that's a plus. I mean, and that's a win.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and what you're telling me too is that you want them to be invested in the agency and in the community, but you are also investing in them and you're willing to have those conversations of what that looks like to invest in their career growth. So I really like that you mentioned it's a partnership. It's not just one-sided.
Absolutely. And you have to also let them know, and it's a conversation I have with all of them, is you're a part of the community now.
Mhm.
And there's been a tremendous disconnect. Over 33 years, I've seen it where officers went from people that would walk around, talk to people. When I grew up in this town, I knew every officer's name. You knew who the policemen were. And then we got to be that nameless, faceless entity behind a police car and drove down the road and we didn't wave at anybody. We didn't talk to people. We had to end that.
Yeah.
And as I told them, you're part of the community. So every officer, I want to walk an hour a day, get out and walk. You must talk to people if they want to talk to you. And you little things like you must wave to people. If people see you coming and they wave at you, wave. It makes a big difference in that person's day to say, hey, that policeman actually knows who I am. He said hello to me. Or, the chief stopped and talked to me today. That means a lot.
Yeah. And I think it builds trust and it also makes, the community feel like they're valued and they're supported. And then that becomes a partnership between the organization and the community too. And that also impacts wellness. We've had this conversation on this podcast before, and um, I find it really interesting that the more positive interactions that you can have throughout the day, the more positive you are going to be as a human being, as a person, right? So if your interactions are all stressful, negative, it's just going call to call, and that's the only interaction that you have in the community, then your mindset is probably going to be negative or stressed, right? But if you take that opportunity to start introducing more of the positive, then more positive things will start to happen. And you'll at least have a sense of like, yeah, this was really hard, but I also had this really good thing happen. I also had a positive interaction where I felt like I helped someone, or someone smiled at me, someone waved at me. I had a thoughtful conversation with somebody. So it's not just all bad all the time.
Right. And whenever I was with Port Authority and I finished my career being a patrol sergeant there, and you do roll call because for Allegheny County, it was a 50-man department, which is a large department in Allegheny County. And you would have roll call, morning, afternoon, night turn. And I would tell the guys and girls, especially around the holidays, when you go down into the subway system or you're down in town and somebody comes up to you on Christmas in the subway and wants to talk to you. There's a reason why they're there on Christmas Day because they don't have anywhere else to go. So take the 2 minutes to talk to them. That could be the difference of somebody making it till tomorrow,
Yeah.
making it thinking, boy, there's nothing to live for. But that policeman took time and talked to me. So I guess I'm not that bad of a person, or maybe I can make another friend tomorrow. So just the simple act of waving, saying hello to people, talking to them. I have some of the older people in my town, and a couple that have passed on, and I went to funerals and their family come up to me and said, Mom used to get so excited because you would see her at the diner and you would come over to the table and talk to her, and she'd tell her caregiver, that's the police chief, and he talks to me. He's a friend of mine. I'm nobody, but to them, that was huge. So, and it makes you feel good too.
Yeah. It makes me emotional because I think that we all forget the power that we have to make a positive impact on someone's life. And I love that you said the small things, because sometimes that is that little glimmer of hope that someone needs in their day. And it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to do that, but it could make the world of difference for somebody. And you and I were talking offline, and it just like brought it to mind. I was just traveling in Texas, and I told you, I was like, yeah, I was driving around and people were waving at me. And I was like, wow, like that's really awesome. Because where I live, people don't look up, like they don't take the time to do that. And for you to say, maybe that is the difference in their life, or maybe it gives them hope, or if I see them there, it means they have nowhere else to go. That takes an incredible amount of emotional intelligence and awareness to have that level of understanding. How do you teach emotional intelligence and empathy to your team? Is there a strategy that you use, or is it just through kind of the same shared conversation that we're having now?
As I said, we have a long conversation when they're hired.
Yeah.
You go through the civil service process and you really don't have a lot of input with that during that, that's a written test, an oral exam. But
Mm.
once you do select an officer and you bring them on, you have that conversation with them. And I firmly believe that a department will take the personality of the police chief. I really believe that you can see, if it's a more aggressive department, sometimes it's a more aggressive chief. If it's a more laid back department, a lot of times it's a laid back chief.
Mm.
My speech is, once again, you're part of the community. And because you're part of the community, you have to understand you are no better than anyone in this community. And by that, I don't mean the person who, abuses their spouse or abuses a child. I'm talking about the single mother that works two jobs for a one-bedroom apartment and, does everything she can just to make ends meet. And you have a really nice house in the suburbs. Just because you have a better job and a better home, you're not better than anyone in this town. And if you start to think you're better than the people you serve, that's when it's time to move on
Mm.
because we don't want you if you are better than everyone. And that was the problem pre me taking over. The officers would come in off shift and talk about, really talk not nice about the people in town.
Yeah.
And, that had to change. That absolutely had to change. So we have those conversations, but the officers see the chief of police, how he feels about the citizens in town. They also know my family, parts of my family still live in this town. So it's important. But I believe that, we haven't kept everybody we've hired. I mean, there's some officers that just didn't meet the standards that we wanted. And there's some officers that didn't really agree with, my style of policing, and they've moved on. But if you look for the right officers, you'll find them. It's not easy in today's day and age of people not wanting to be police officers, but we, believe it or not, have not had one position open that we have had any difficulty filling. We have filled every position. We went from a half part-time department, half full-time department to 100% full-time department.
Um,
And the officers make a really good living. They have phenomenal benefits. And for the most part, I mean, nobody's going to say, hooray, I get to go to work today all the time. But, what they will tell you on average is if I have to go to work, this is where I want to go.
yeah. No.
And, it's really important too, though, our mindset is we don't yell at anybody. Okay. Now, obviously, if you're on a call and people raise their voice, you're going to raise your voice. But I mean, we don't yell at the people in town, but we don't yell at our officers either. If
Mm,
somebody does something wrong, we're going to discuss it. Okay. No officer is allowed to train another officer and raise their voice with them and embarrass them or humiliate them. If you embarrass or humiliate an officer, if they see something going wrong, they may be too scared to interject because they think they're going to get yelled at.
yeah.
So, we don't train that way. That's not the way we act. And that's important. That's important that they know, that they're not coming into work and the chief's going to be in a bad mood, and watch what you say around them. And that's when I was starting and when I came up through the ranks. I mean, you were in fear of the chief half of the time because, and of the other supervisors, because that was the mindset. And that's not healthy. That's very unhealthy. You try and make sure you never send an officer home worried about their job.
Yeah.
So if there's a problem, we're going to discuss it before you go home. You don't have to stay home it was nothing worse than you'd go home on your Friday and you wouldn't see the chief again for 2 days. And you were thinking, oh my goodness, I screwed up and he's mad at me. What's he going to do? And you worry about it for the 2 days when you should be enjoying your family. You
Yeah.
know, don't go home worried about your job.
Yeah. There's a couple things I really want to kind of dissect in what you said because one of the things that I believe in, and maybe other people have different opinions, but I think that the more empathy we can have for people and the less judgment, then the better off we are in general. And we can relate this to a lot of different things, right? It's like how can we have more empathy for maybe people who are struggling and less judgment? How can we have empathy for, like you said, in your profession, maybe having more empathy for the people that you serve and less judgment. And so I think you can do that personally too. Maybe we can have a little bit more empathy for like our partners or spouses and maybe a little less judgment. And so I really think that that's a powerful statement and way to live. And I had a conversation recently and this kind of stuck out to me because I talk about culture a lot with leadership. It's a topic that we have on this podcast a lot and the importance of having a healthy, strong foundation in culture. But I was talking to someone in person and they were almost in tears and they said that they have been on this job for a long time. They're in patrol. And they were like, I've seen some really bad stuff in my career, and they were pretty graphic with the explanation. They're like, I've seen this, and I won't say it on the podcast, but, they're like, I've seen this. And they said, I have never been more stressed and just deflated than I am now with our current leadership. and it was talking about like the culture, and how they had a lot of change and there was a lot of maybe turbulence there. And they just looked so sad. And, what I've learned from other people is sometimes the internal stress is greater than the external. And so to your point of how can you support people in an effective way, how can you have effective communication skills? Because screaming at someone is never effective. How can you effectively communicate? How can you support people in a healthy way? How can you have more empathy, less judgment? And how can you try to reduce the stress within the walls of an organization? Because there's enough stress that goes on outside of the
Absolutely.
organization. I'm curious to know, you've been in this career now, 33 years. How has this career impacted you? And maybe how have those things impacted? I know you said that you have a certain way that you lead and a certain mindset as a leader. How have those things impacted the way you lead today?
Well, I wasn't always this way. I came up through the police ranks when, you didn't show fear, you didn't show emotions, you didn't get upset. I remember when getting blood on you was almost a badge of courage. You went into a bad scene and you saw this and did this, and you walked away and you pretended like it didn't bother you, but
Hmm.
it did. It did, and it does. But when I started, you just had to have that tough guy attitude, that tough guy mentality. And as I said, our supervisors, you feared them. I mean, they would yell, they would scream. If you did anything wrong, it was like some of them actually enjoyed disciplining you. And, as I said, over the years, you just learn, well, you've lost some people that would have been really good policemen,
Yeah.
but they stopped doing this job because of the people that were training them and the way that they were treated. And, we can't afford to do that. So the culture has changed as far as being able to show emotions, being able to say something bothers you. I think for the most part, policemen still try and play tough. I try and let them see when things bother me. If
Mm.
it's okay, if a call bothers me, maybe it's okay that it bothers them.
Yeah.
As I tell people all the time, we don't go home after seeing something really bad and just forget about it. It doesn't work that way. Um, because I'm getting older, I think some of the calls bother me more. It kind of hits home a little bit closer. But as I says, you know, back in the day, it wasn't like this. But today, luckily, we have, at least I do here, I have a phenomenal council. I have a really good mayor that don't interfere with what we do here. They allow me to train my officers for just about anything. If we can justify it, we send people to training.
Yeah.
But we also have, a police social worker. We're in between our police social worker right now. Our one just left short time ago, and we're going to be hiring another one. So we have an in-house social worker that
Mm.
we can talk to and talks to, and helps the people in the town. We also have a couple organizations in town that have therapists on staff, and they're available to us. It's really hard to get an officer to go. I mean, there's times you can force them if you want to, but it's still a little tough getting them there. But it's okay to do that. It's absolutely okay. But just as you had said, if an officer, and I've seen it in a couple neighboring communities, that officers leaving jobs that they've been at 10, 12, 15 years because of the management,
Hmm.
because of the people inside. And just as you said, I've seen just about everything, but I can't take every day coming to work feeling like my boss is out to get me.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for the officer. It's not healthy for their families because you take it home with you inevitably.
Yeah.
As much as you say not to, it did. And as I told you when we spoke initially, I didn't expect to be divorced after 33 years of marriage. But I am. And, to a very large degree, it's because of this job. And that's another thing I've learned that I try and pass on to my officers. And that's really important is, a saying that I've learned is love your family like your job.
Mm,
Don't do the opposite. And unfortunately, I poured way too much time and effort into my career where, it took away from my family.
yeah. There are a few things you said that I thought were really interesting. One being that like the older you get, maybe the more things impact you. I think that that's a really interesting statement. I don't know if I've ever had anyone say that, and I can see why that would be. And you have maybe the younger generation who hasn't quite seen all the things yet, or maybe it's not impacting them yet. And so I find it really interesting for you to say that, and I appreciate you saying that, especially as a leader, to say, you know what, like I'm still impacted by these things, and actually they might impact me a little bit more now than they used to. And I've posed this question before because I'm not in your line of work. And so, I can't relate to everything that you say, obviously, but I have always posed the question because there is that statement of don't bring work home. And I've asked this question before. I'm like, is that possible? Like, if we are going to recognize that we are all human, are there strategies and ways to maybe not bring it all with you? I think yes. I'm sure that there are ways, and I've taught like down regulation and, things like that, but to never ever take things home, I find to be really, really challenging and maybe not quite possible. Like you're human and things are going to impact you. But I also think that, as we get older, there are always going to be things in our life where we wish maybe we would have done things a little bit differently. And we start to realize that maybe our priorities weren't where they were supposed to be. And I am also guilty of prioritizing my career over my family. And that has had a very similar outcome to what you shared. And I think sometimes you do look back and you're like, wow, like if I could go back, maybe I would have done things a little bit differently. And of course, we don't have that ability to. And so now it's almost feels like a duty to pass that on to other people in hopes that they will hear us in these conversations that we have and maybe not repeat those same things.
And that's what, especially my officers that are married and have children,
Mm,
I implore them, I beg them and tell them, listen, don't miss one T-ball game, one dance recital, one cheerleading contest, one football game for an overtime shift.
yeah.
Don't do it. It's not worth it. I was a detective for about 4.5, almost 5 years, and my partner there is still my best friend. He'll be my brother forever. But we talk about it all the time. I mean, we turned down no overtime, none. And we solved every case just about that. We had a 98% closure rate.
Wow.
And who really remembers that now? Okay, when you think about it, now we're not talking about homicides or, kilos of dope. It was transit related, mainly fraud and that type of crime. But still, we put a lot of time, we solved all these cases. Nobody remembers that. But I would remember the baseball games that I missed. I
Mm,
would remember the times that, you know, I should have been at different events that I was not at. My youngest son just turned 30, and he has a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. And
mm,
he is without a doubt the best dad I've ever seen. He works from home and he is the most involved dad. I mean, he is truly 50-50. And I sit there and I watch him and I say, I just don't remember those things when he was little. And
mm,
it was because, I was working 1,000 hours of overtime a year.
yeah.
I never said no whenever they called me for a case in the middle of the night. And it's not worth it. And as I said, I harp that on these officers, don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah. And I think it's challenging. I think sometimes it's almost like you have to like have that perspective, to understand things. And what I'm noticing, and I would love your perspective on this, is, the younger officers maybe aren't thinking that way yet. They maybe don't have that like perspective yet. And so we have this conversation about, how do you get people to prioritize themselves? Because we know that you're really good at taking care of everybody else, but sometimes maybe not so good at taking care of yourself. So, how do you get the younger officers to be more proactive in taking care of themselves and taking care of their family? And then, how do you get them to buy in to this concept of proactive wellness and setting themselves up for success? Do you have any insights or strategies on that?
The officers, I mean, some officers are very close to the vest as far as privacy. They don't talk too much about their home life or, their spouses or their significant others, and other ones will tell you everything,
Hmm.
probably more than you want to know.
Yeah.
Uh, but again, when they want to talk to you, listen.
Hmm.
Okay. Make a point to ask them to try and remember names of all the children and spouses and ask them how everything's going. How's it, if they're buying a house, say, hey, how's the house going? And you also make it very clear to them, listen, you have X amount of time off every year, this many vacation days, this many holidays, this many personal days, this many sick days. If you need the time, you take it.
Hmm.
Nobody's going to be angry at you. We will fill the shift and the world will go on. But if you should be home, I mean, I have an officer now who her wife is pregnant and it's they've waited a long time to have a baby. And I've told her if something's going, if your wife is not feeling good, stay home.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. That's what's important. So I think if they know that they're supported by management, if they need to be off, if they need time to do something, they will. I also stress to them, the importance of having a hobby or to do something. I mean, most of my officers are really big into physical fitness. They're much better at going to a gym than I am, but that's their kind of their way to blow off steam. Some hunt. I mean, I fish. So everybody has something. And just like I said, just the fact that the chief knows a little bit about you and is willing to know something about you is important, but not to overpry because, if they don't want you to know about something, it's best, you even if you hear about it, you keep that to yourself. So.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, or I should say, I talk a lot about the importance of feeling valued. I have never met anyone in my life personally who didn't want to feel valued, and so whatever it takes to make sure that everyone feels like they're an integral part of the team and that they're seen and that they're heard, if and when they're ready. Maybe, like you said, maybe some people don't want to talk about it, but even just saying, like, hey, like, congratulations, I heard that you're buying a house. That's great. Like that, I think that means something to someone to be like, wow, like, I'm not just another cog in the system. I'm not just a check mark, or a hot seat in the chair. I'm actually someone that people care about. And I think that everyone wants to feel that way, whether that's professionally or personally. And I love that you touched on two different things. One, the value of mentorship. And I think that everybody has the ability to be a mentor. We all have our own lived experiences and things that we're really good at and things that maybe we didn't do so well. Like we've all fallen flat on our face too. Like I have fallen flat on my face maybe more than I care to admit, but we all have value to give. And I think that people can learn from everybody. And so this value of mentorship of saying, hey, like, stay home. It's important for you to be there for your family. And I know because I didn't do that very well. And I regret that. And I want to make sure that I'm supporting you. And having these conversations, this mentorship, where the younger generation starts to understand maybe what some of those like sticking points are, or like some of those things to maybe look out for, from people who have done it before them. But the one sentence that you said that really stuck with me is that the world will go on. And when I was early in my career, I genuinely thought that the world could not go on if I was not there. Like, I thought that I was so important and I had to put all my eggs in that basket because otherwise, like, I didn't know what anyone else would do without me, and now I
Absolutely.
look at it
Yeah.
and I kind of like laugh because like I'm not that important, and maybe at the time when I was younger, I thought I was more important than I am. And I think that perspective also comes with age and experience and maybe stepping away from opportunities and realizing that things do actually go on without you there and people don't really reach out and don't really care as much as you thought that they did, and you kind of have to have that experience. But I ended up leaving my grandmother's deathbed to go work. Because in my head, I was like, she'll be fine. Like, she'll be there. It'll be good, and I have to be there because I'm the headline. I'm the one I'm presenting. Like, and if I'm not there, then everything else is going to crumble. And so I have to go. And I remember having so much anxiety about needing to be there for this professional engagement. And I left, and she did not get better. She passed away, and she asked for me, and I wasn't there. And I did not need to be at that event. And retrospectively, that event was not important. It was so insignificant. But at the time, I really thought that the world would not go on. And so I appreciate that sentence of like, I promise you, everyone will be okay if you are not there. But will you be okay if you're not there for the people who matter in your life? You know, are you, that's something I have to live with every day is that she asked for me and I wasn't there. And I'm not okay with that. That's something I've had to deal with and live with because I prioritize work over that. And so um, I am a testament to that statement that you made as well, is that life will go on and there are things that are more important.
Yeah, I mean, it's a saying they'll tell you all the time, listen, if you drop off the face of the earth tomorrow, this place is going to open up the next day and somebody's going to answer the calls and somebody's going to sit at this desk. And it's true. But, also what I need them to know is, I was made back in my time to fear if you weren't there, maybe they'd replace you, or maybe you wouldn't get the next promotion, or maybe, you didn't show dedication to the team. No, I want you to know here, you're not losing your position. You're not losing anything. If you need to be home, go. We'll get through it.
Yeah.
I think for the first 9 years that I was here, I worked every Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, and New Year's Day, so that the younger guys with families, younger females with families, could stay home. My kids were grown, so I really didn't need to be. I could go visit them. Now that my grandkids are here, I take Christmas. But it's important that, they also see that, listen, the chief's willing to come in and work the shift so I can stay home with my kids and watch them, open up their gifts.
Yeah.
Once again, that's leadership again. It's not doing it for a pat on the back. I'm certainly not doing it for the money. But it's important that they see, listen, stay home, but you're not losing anything. Nobody's taking it as, oh, you're not a team player. No, I'm telling you to stay home because that's where you should be.
Yeah.
Just like when you're sick. I mean, it used to be such an unwritten rule. We don't want you to use sick time. We give you sick time, but we don't want you to use it. If you are sick, I tell officers every time whenever they're going home and they sound like crap, stay home. Stay home and get better. We'll be fine. Um, but once again, that's just, that's my feelings toward it. That's not everybody's, but luckily I have bosses here, on council and the mayor that back it up. So,
Yeah. And I do want to talk about that a little bit. You saying like that's leadership, and you've kind of alluded to this a few times throughout the conversation of like your particular leadership style and your mindset that you've brought into this organization. And you kind of mentioned this a little bit to me offline that maybe you have a different mindset than maybe what's I'll put it in quotes, like normal or typical. Can you give a little bit of insight on your particular mindset and leadership strategy or style?
I'm probably a little more liberal than most. And that comes from world experience too. I've learned, you know, at one point, myself and my partner made more arrests between the two of us than the whole department combined for almost 2 years.
Mm.
I've made, trust me, way more arrests than the average officer has. It's gotten us nowhere. Okay. I'm not saying you don't take bad guys off, girls off the street, but we have to have a little bit of empathy and sympathy. And we have to start understanding sometimes how people got to where they are in life. Um, the best thing I ever did is I worked at a methadone clinic off duty as security at the methadone clinic. And I started to get to know people as mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters that wanted the same thing I did, and they didn't want to be where they were at in life.
Hmm.
And then you would come into work, and the officers would call them, the J word for an addict, which we don't use. And I'd say, wait a minute, how can you blame that person when their parents put a needle in their arm when they were 11 years old?
Hmm.
When their parents or uncle were the ones that started getting them high when they were a child.
Hmm.
How do you blame them for that? Okay. You have to understand that there's a cause and effect to everything. And if we just want to think of all these people as, addicts and no good and incorrigible, and, you know, we're going nowhere. We're absolutely going nowhere. The war on drugs was lost a long time ago. Okay. We can take as many people off the streets as we want. It's still going to come pouring in. We have to change that mindset. We've got to. Addiction is a disease.
Hmm.
It's an absolute disease, and we have to treat it like a disease. I took a day off on Friday, a personal day, because I've been trying to talk somebody in my town to go and get medicated assisted treatment. Okay. And they wouldn't go unless I took them.
Hmm.
And I said, okay. I took the day off and got them there. They got their treatment, and they'll go back in another month. If that changes that person's life, wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's fantastic. And that's not just with drug related crimes, that's with a lot of things. I've had, children that were raised in environments that were so unhealthy and no child should ever see. And then they would get to be 14 or 15 years old and break the law, and you bring them into the station. You got to sit them down and talk to them and say, listen, I understand why you're where you're at. I understand why you're such an angry kid, because you want to come home after school and have a snack and have your parents ask you what homework do you need done, have dinner, go to bed. But you know your parents are never home. They're out looking for their next fix, or they're doing this or doing that, and nobody really cares. And you're an angry person because of it. And I get that. And we have to look for other ways, not necessarily always, they all have to be locked up. They all have to go, because that does not work. We have to understand that people have problems, and but for the grace of God, any one of us could have been there. So, it's just not as easy as black and white, or, handcuffs or not handcuffs. So,
And I did not share this with you offline, but this is a topic that I think I could talk to you on a whole nother podcast for an entire hour because this is very near and dear to my heart. And I really appreciate that mindset because I grew up with drug addict parents. My parents were both meth addicts. My dad was incarcerated. He was gang affiliated. So I grew up in that environment. And when he got out, I had, domestic violence exposure, drug exposure, and I think I grew up with that being my dad. Whereas maybe someone else would see like him as, a no good gangbanger drug addict, which there were those qualities to him and those decisions that he made, but to see them as more than that, I really do appreciate that because I was, brought up in that environment. It was very confusing for me as a kid too, because like, in domestic violence situations, it was like on one end, like I wanted to, um, I wanted help and I wanted to call the police and because I knew that what was happening was really scary and that someone might die. But then on the other end, it was my dad.
Absolutely.
And then when I first started in my wellness career, I also worked in drug rehab facilities. So I worked in detox and I worked in inpatient. And so I think when you have those perspectives, then you do start to question what got you here. And could, obviously I had my own experiences with like my own traumas and things that I had to do, and I didn't make the best decisions when I was younger. And I was also angry, and I related to like what you said of like wanting to go home and have parents there, but they weren't there. And like me going home and my mom was always out partying and doing drugs and I was alone. And my snack after school was Taco Bell hot sauce packets, and so everything you said, I was like, wow, he's speaking to me. And I do think that we all have our own decisions, but I do think that sometimes, like you said, it's not black and white, and it is like, where did someone come from, and what drove them to those decisions, and how can we see people as people, and beyond maybe what the symptoms are, like what is beneath the surface, what is the core to what's going on, And so I really appreciate you saying that. And my experience working in rehab facilities was really hard. But I also really believed in rehabilitation. I really believed that people could, if they had the right resources and the right people that are guiding them into these healthier paths, that could happen. And now my dad is, it took him a really long time to get there, but now he's sober and he's, a manager at a company and he has a
Good for him.
family with a daughter and he made his way out. And so I have seen it happen, but I appreciate that mindset a lot. And I think that sometimes we have to, it goes back to empathy, what we said, empathy instead of judgment.
And you have to have a very bad memory in this job. Sometimes you have to have a really bad memory. And people I'll see, I'll arrest somebody, uh, 2 weeks ago. And one woman in particular, she kicked me somewhere that hurt a lot. Breath. Um, and I saw her about 2 weeks later. And I went up to her and talking to her, and she goes, I can't believe you're talking to me. And I said, why wouldn't I? And I said, you were intoxicated. We held accountable, but that's yesterday. This is today. And I don't know how many times I had an officer no longer here that would tell somebody when they were intoxicated or high, why don't you do the right thing and sober up? Why don't you sober up and just do this and do that? Well, the one woman in particular he kept saying that to did phenomenally, did sober up. We had arrested her or had her probably 100 times, but she got sober, went into long-term recovery. And he still called her a drunk when
Mm,
he would see her. Well, she did everything you said. Why don't you go do? But in your mind, she's still a drunk. Don't you understand? If somebody is sober for 1 hour, not a day, not a week, 1 hour, didn't use something for an hour, and you walk in and call them a name, they say, "Why should I bother?"
right.
That's what people are going to think of me forever. You have to say, hey, great job. Keep on going, man. But you know what? If you slip, we'll be here to help you get back on the horse again.
Yeah.
because you're human and you may slip. But great job. It's fantastic. Keep on going. I'm your number one fan. I tell people that all the time. Listen, I'm your number one fan for what you're doing. Keep on going. It
Yeah.
means a lot.
Yeah.
So
There's and I don't want to take too much of your time. I'll say one final thing and then we can kind of wrap with my final question. But um, I truly believe that when you hear things enough times, you start to believe it. And I think that this can be good or bad, right? So if someone tells you, you're doing great, good job, I believe in you, keep going, and you hear that enough times, you're going to start to believe in yourself that you can do that. And then the reverse is also true. I've had both in my life. I've had people who have championed me and who have really believed in me and gave me the confidence to believe in myself. And I've also had times in my life where people are like, you're going to amount to nothing. You're going to end up just like your parents. The best shot that you have is just to not end up in prison, and you start to hear those things over and over again. And you're like, wow, maybe I am just meant to be this, maybe I'm not meant to be something great. Maybe I will just be this forever. Maybe this is what I'm destined to be, like you said, what's the point? And so I think that it goes back to what we said before is that we all have the ability to impact someone's life either in a positive or a negative way. And that's your choice, on how you want to be. But I do think the more you start to hear either positive or negative reinforcement, the more you're going to believe that.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we get that from a very young age. Look at the children. Like I said, my son, I use an example because I'm partial, but him, especially, his baby's only 4 months old, but his little boy is his best buddy. I
Mhm.
mean, they just are, every time he falls down and has a cat on his knee, it's dad, 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 because dad is a hero and dad tells him constantly, you are so smart, buddy. I can't believe you did that. That is what they should be hearing. But people, adults need to hear that too. If
Yeah.
you see somebody that hasn't worked in years because they were always intoxicated, they've been sick with addiction, and all of a sudden they're working, they have a conversation with you, tell them, man, you look great.
Mhm.
This is fantastic. You look great. That goes so far.
Yeah.
And what did it take for you to say that?
Yeah.
So, it's important.
Yeah, it's a little bit of effort and a little bit of awareness. So I appreciate that. My final question for you is in the context of wellness for the younger generation. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I would say that it probably harkens back to what I said. I put way too much time into my job, not enough time into my family. Do your job, do it with ethics, always be ethical. Don't ever take the shortcuts. Do things the right way. Don't ever risk arresting somebody who may be innocent. Okay, make sure you never do that. Dot your I's, cross your T's, let 20 guilty people go before you put one innocent person in jail. But most of all, take care of your family, love your family, like your job. You will do well down the line, but never, never, never take that overtime shift, take a detail, come in because an arrest can be made when you can go to something at home or just sit at home and play Monopoly. And like I said, it was my fault. I did it. Okay. I absolutely sacrificed my family for my career and was not worth it. Was not worth it. So
Yeah,
probably that's the best advice I could give.
thank you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on here and sharing your experience, your wisdom, your insights. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course.